down me out, 'cause I've fallen out.
Simon says, hands in the air. Nicely done. Now poke your neighbor. Ooh, this is a good crowd. This is really good. I like it. All right, Simon says, I've done this once at camp and it was fantastic. Absolutely loved the response. Simon says, you can put your hands down. Simon says, laugh for 30 seconds out loud. Go. Out loud, come on. Come on, get some belly chuckles in. Let's go. Okay, stop. Nicely done. Okay, Simon says you can stop. So all of us have different leaders that we can refer to that we set apart in our minds as just saying elite leader, like top of the world, top of the chain, top of the food chain. This guy is phenomenal, or this gal is phenomenal. Let's hear who in your mind are some of the greatest leaders the world has ever seen, okay? No holds bar. It doesn't matter which category you put them in. Just who's top leader in your mind? No, that doesn't count. False. Thank you for the compliment, Kobe. Forget, that's not where I was going, I promise. So anyone, like who are some top world leaders? Yes, Nelson Mandela. Yeah, that's good. Okay. What? Who? You're going to have to educate me on that one. Okay. I like it. Give me that name later. I'm going to research him. I love research. Who else? Yes, Ronald Reagan, Winston Churchill. Good. In fact, Winston Churchill, there's a story about a little girl from Brazil who wrote a letter to the greatest man in the world. And that's what she stamped it as. That was the sending address. Greatest man in the world, and it showed up on Winston Churchill's doorstep. No joke. That's a true story. That's incredible to have that type of prestige. Okay, who else? Okay, Jesus. There's your Sunday school answer, everybody. Well done. He is the greatest. In fact, he's how I'm closing today's talk. So go figure, right? Okay, what else? You had to look it up. Who is that guy?
He's the inventor of cereal.
Inventor of cereal. Thank you, Siri. Okay. Warren Buffett, yeah. Steve Jobs, a phenomenal leader in our day. What? Yeah. Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. Okay. Who? Genghis Kong. I thought you said King Kong. I was like, well done, sir. Well done. Okay, so as we think about that top paradigm, who's the bottom paradigm? Who are and this is rhetorical. No names, please, because Steve Rowland will be on that list, I promise. But on the bottom of the paradigm, who are some of the worst leaders that you've ever encountered, that you've ever thought about? And remember, this is one of those where you're just kind of internally processing that. Because I think all of us have had good leadership and bad leadership that we've experienced. Whether it's a boss that we've had at the job site or in our cubicle, maybe it's just in life. Maybe your dad wasn't who he should have been. Maybe your mom wasn't who they should have been. Maybe your grandma or grandpa, aunt or uncle. Maybe you had a pastor or a minister that just didn't quite get it. We've all had those kind of icky, moments with leadership, right? And when you think about leadership, when you think about the word leadership, we have to wonder how many of us in this room would identify as being a leader. And that one I'm going to ask for crowd participation on too. If you identify yourself as a leader, self-identified leader, maybe you're a team lead in your corporate world, maybe you have a ministry that you're leading here at the church. How many of you, maybe you're the boss of a major deal. How many of you would identify as being a leader in this room? Okay, so there aren't very many of you. I would say perhaps maybe 20 to 25%, rough guess, of you raise your hands. And that's very common to hear. But my challenge for today is we're starting an entire new series called Follow the Leader. And the reason that we're talking about Follow the Leader is we're in a season right now as a church where we are actively seeking who our next leadership people will be at Rising Sun. We do that every year. This is an annual process because we realize that time knows no bounds on leadership. And not only that, but we want to make sure that we're seeking God's next step for Rising Sun. So September is always, and as far as I'm concerned, probably will always be the time where Rising Sun starts to identify leadership. And so I thought it was appropriate to talk about leadership and what is leadership. But today, my challenge is going to be is to try to present a case that all of us are leaders. That we're not just specifically talking about eldership at Rising Sun. We'll get to that in this series. But today, it's about all of us are leaders. That it's not just the 20 or 25% of people that raise their hands. All the way from the youngest even to the oldest, we have some sense of responsibility for leadership. I have some statistics that I want to share with you real quick. So we're going to move really quick, buckle up. But this idea of leadership, the whole notion, the whole conversation is a growing conversation in our nation. And not just in our nation, but in our world. Globally, experts are giving themselves to the study of leadership development. And what everyone is saying, okay, I'm not suggesting it's true, but what everyone is saying is that leadership is in crisis today. So we're going to look at some of those stats. The first stat that I have for you is from the National Geographic. So let me go back to my notes here. I'm sorry, Psychology Today is where it's from, this article is. And what it says is that leadership development programs have failed to produce good leaders. Over 20,000 books and thousands of articles have been written about critical elements of leadership. One of the stats that I read this last year is in the United States alone, we've spent over $50 billion on leadership development. There's a lot of research given to this idea of leadership. Yet even today, despite the collective wisdom, this is what Psychology Today says, even today, despite the collective wisdom of centuries on this topic, confidence in our leaders is at an all-time low, and it continues to decline. It goes on to say 77% of those polled nationally or those polled nationwide in the U.S. say that the country now has a crisis in leadership, and confidence levels have fallen to the lowest level recorded in recent times. So nationally, one of the stats is that 30% of Fortune 500 companies and executives have lasted less than 3 years in their position. Isn't that incredible? When you stop and analyze that nearly a third of our top business execs are lasting less than 3 years in their position. What type of legacy can we pass in really a 3-year rotation? Hardly any. So it's no surprise to us that confidence levels have fallen to an all-time low. Top executive failures have been as high as 75% and rarely less than 30%. So top executive failure rates have been as high as 3/4 and as low as 30. Globally, though, this is what it says, that chief executives are lasting, on average, almost 7.5 years in their position. In 1995, the average was for a top executive to last 10 years, to last a decade in their position. But today, the average has dropped nearly 30%. There are people who are predicting that in 2025, that 38% of chief executives will fail at their job in the first year and a half. That's where we're going to be. So leadership is in crisis, is what the concern is. But there's also a concern if we take corporate world off the table and if we focus on the church, there's also a concern in the church world, in the church environment for leadership there. One study reveals that 17% of churches predicted have an age range of 20 to 44 by 2025. So if you reduce this statistic and probability and prediction, what it's saying is in 7 years, nearly 7 years, our percentage of attendance will be 17% of our body will be made up of the millennials. That's what it's saying. That's pretty low. So when you think about running a relay race, and if there's no one that you're supposed to pass the baton to, or there's a few selection on who you pass the baton to, there's a growing epidemic of concern. And this was in Christianity Today. It says that there are 3 reasons why church leaders are disappearing. It says ministry education models are not sustainable. And what that means is that we send these kids or these young people to colleges or universities or institutions, and they receive their masters of theology or their doctorates if they continue their education. They rack up this huge student debt loan, and then at the end of that huge student debt loan process, maybe 10 years, they enter a church where they're not really compensated very, very well. Traditionally, church compensation for ministers has not been that high. Fortunately, here in this congregation, one of the things I'm proud about is that Rising Sun has kind of taken the initiative on saying, no, we're not going to be status quo. We're going to bless our ministers. We're going to try to do a better job at that in that category. So, but ministry education models are not sustainable when you factor in expense of the education and the compensation of the employment. A second reason why leadership is in crisis for the church is that the millennials have a disillusionment about that it's hard. It makes it too hard for them to see themselves as being leaders. So there's something happening inside their minds that says, you know what, I'm just going to kind of wait on you guys to figure it out. In fact, John Mayer, he's a pop artist, and I listen to some of his music. He has some pretty good stuff to say. But in one of his lyrics on the song "Waiting on the World to Change," he says this: "Me and all my friends, we're all misunderstood. They say that we stand for nothing, and there's no way we ever could. Now we see everything that's going wrong with the world and those who lead it, and we just feel like we don't have the means to rise above and beat it. So we keep waiting on the world to change. We keep waiting on the world to change." He goes on to say, "It's hard to beat the system when you're standing at a distance, so we keep waiting on the world to change." And what he's saying is, we haven't been invited to the table to really talk about how to bring solution to this. Now, if we had the power to bring our neighbors home from war, and he's talking about some social issues here, they would never have to miss a Christmas, no more ribbons on the door. And when you trust your television, when you get is what you got, or what you get is what you got, because when they own the information, they can bend it all they want. So we keep waiting. He goes into the chorus again. And then the last lyric, or the last verse, he says this: "And it's not that we don't care. We just don't know that the fight ain't fair. So we keep waiting on the world to change." Then he says this as a close: "One day our generation," listen to these words, this is powerful stuff. "One day our generation is going to rule the population. So we keep on waiting. We keep on waiting on the world to change." What he's saying is, socially and culturally, you don't want our help. And when you compare that to the church's noise, sometimes that's true. Sometimes we don't want the younger people to help us because they're going to botch it. They're going to mess it all up, aren't they? So one of the reasons why leaders in the millennial category are leaving is why? We've not invited them, basically, is what that second point says in Christianity Today. The third thing that it says is that emerging leaders don't often fit the existing leadership models. There's a guy by the name of Rex Miller. He's a so-called expert on the millennial epidemic with churches, and he says in the Millennium Matrix, by the way, a couple of his books are floating around your leadership here. We found some, when we went to the North American list last year, we had several elders who went down, and we're talking about, okay, what do we do? Who is the next generation behind us? So we've started to look at strategies already, and some of your leadership have 4 or 5 books that we're circling. We've been discussing millennium stuff. But Rex Miller says in his book, he describes a transition in leadership model that began around 2010. He says that in the broadcast era, from around 1950 to 2010, okay, we were looking for a leader who was commanding, he was forceful, he had a presence about him. This leader's influence was established by their achievement and the rapport that he had with others, or she had with others. He goes on to say, but now in the digital age, we look for a leader who facilitates collaboration and whose resource and relational network actually establishes their influence So their mindset and their mentality is, let's do this together, not have the champion. So their leadership model sometimes interfaces not too well with our models. Does that make sense? Is there a leadership crisis in today's world? Absolutely. And all you have to do is look around in even the communities. Chad and I were talking this last year about how the Palooza that was happening in Altoona, they're looking for leaders. Everywhere you go, they're looking for leaders. They're trying to cultivate leaders in community. Why? Because everyone senses no one wants to be the champion anymore. And it's not that no one wants to be the champion, it's just they want to do it different. And they don't know how. It's really difficult to lead something that you're also changing at the same time. So there's an epidemic in our world today where leadership is difficult to find. Or maybe for you personally, you identify with this movie clip. So I'm going to ask the house lights to kind of come down. This is from the movie A Bug's Life. And the grasshopper in the scene is the bad guy, okay? And what he does is he goes to the ant and he says, all right, where's our stuff that you promised to give us? And we're going to take our cut now. And they're in leadership transition. I want you to check out this clip because you might identify with it. And this might be personally one of the reasons why you say, I'm not a leader. Roll. No, go back to the video. Right above that. Susan's doing a great job. I'm the one that messes this up. I really am. I'm the one that messed it up on her because I did 2 PowerPoints today. So it's the one right before that, Susan.
Starting to take over from me, Hopper.
Oh, I see. Under new management. So it's your fault.
No, it wasn't me. It wasn't.
First rule of leadership. Everything is your fault.
Right? Maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't want to own leadership is because we recognize that when you're in a leadership position, where the blame stops is with who? The leader. And so I think we're seeing this weird cultural epidemic where a lot of young leaders are not emerging simply because the reward is not worth the risk at times. So, why is leadership necessary? Why is it important for us to even discuss? I think it's because leadership affects you, leadership is about you, and leadership should ultimately come from you, okay? I'll say it again. I think leadership affects you, leadership is about you, and I think ultimately leadership comes from you. See, we're going to roll some titles here. We're going to, like I said earlier, tons of research have gone to leadership resources and curriculum. One of the top leadership instructors in our world today, tell me who it is. He went 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. Who wrote that? John Maxwell. Anything about leadership you'll see from John Maxwell. John Maxwell says, leadership is not about titles and positions or flowcharts. It's about one life influencing another. Ken Blanchard's another top leader and a leader of leaders. He says the key to successful leadership is all about influence. It's not about authority. And so you're hearing some of that vernacular in the last 10, 20 years. John Quincy Adams said this: if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. The task of a leader is to get his people from where they are to where they have not been. Henry Kinsinger said that. Ralph Nader says, true leaders don't create followers. Catch this. This is one of my favorite quotes. True leaders do not create followers. They create more leaders. That's what a real leader is all about. Perhaps in the millennials age, okay, in this new era that we've entered into, for all of the kids who are 16, 15, all the way through 35 to 40, there's a new guy that's emerging in leadership conversation and leadership circles, and his name is Simon Sinek. You can go check out one of his TED Talks on leadership. He's phenomenal. I really like listening to him. He is not a believer. You need to know that. So I'm putting a big qualifier on it. But he says this: we need leaders, and he writes a book, Leaders Eat Last. It's all about servant leadership. We need leaders that make us feel that we're moving forward, that our efforts have value to a greater cause, that someone is watching out for us. He goes on to say, I'll go ahead and put it here. That only happens when people who make us feel like that we're a part of something. But the flip side of that, the problem of that is that when we don't feel that there's someone looking out for us and offering us some sense of belonging or security, we get the sense of paranoia. And then he goes on to say, we actually become introverted. We become self-interested. So cynic instinctively, and I think primitively, leans into an ancient truth that we find in Scripture. Why? Because we all have that thumbprint of eternity in us. That's what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes. But Proverbs chapter 11, verse 14 says, without wise leadership, what? A nation fails. There is safety with many advisors. We need leaders who will listen to the voices around them. And today, we don't have that. At least there's a growing concern that we don't have that. You see, leadership is everybody's business. Your leadership here at the church, just every year we try to encourage them to read a book. And we just got through reading the Leadership Challenge, Christian Reflections on the Leadership Challenge. And at the very beginning of the book, he says this. It's a collection of authors. Let me turn to it. It says that leadership is a process ordinary people use when they are bringing forth the best in themselves and others. Leadership is everyone's business. The reason I think that leadership is everyone's business and that leadership has to exist is because leadership is about relationship. What do we do with this personal responsibility? Some of you probably were wondering why I brought these chairs out and what they have to do with anything. See, I think leadership can be summarized like this. Everyone has, and I'm going to give you 3 leadership principles today that I've found to be true in my life. The first one is that everyone has the same sense of responsibility for leadership. Everyone sits in a chair. You have a responsibility to lead yourself well, right? That's why when Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, one of the most misquoted verses in all the Bible, that when you see your brother who has a speck of dust in his eye, don't be criticizing your brother for his speck until what? Until you have removed the 2x4 from your own. We all have a sense of responsibility, of leadership, but with that sense of responsibility, we have 2 different things that we have to do. One is self-evaluation. We constantly have to be evaluating our strengths, our weaknesses, our abilities. We have to know ourselves well, and the problem with leadership sometimes is that you overthink or that you overestimate your ability, or you even undervalue your ability. You don't think that you're good enough, or you think that you're too good. And when that's out of balance and out of whack, your life's not reflecting any sort of leadership responsibility at all. So the very first sense is that everyone has a single chair sense of responsibility for leadership. Bill Hybels says the toughest management problem that you'll ever face is you. It's not someone else. It's you. It's getting up out of bed. It's doing the things that we know that we need to do. It's paying the bills on time. It's mowing the lawn. It's all the stuff that we don't want to do. But, man, we really want to point our fingers at other people because if the spotlight's on them and not on me, then we don't see my weakness. But the second sense of personal responsibility that we have isn't just self-evaluation, but also self-management. We have to really kind of consider what are the things that we're doing well in. Galatians chapter 5, verse 19 through 22. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, faithfulness, and above all things, love. So when you consider that those are the fruit of the Spirit, and you think about self-management, maybe some of you in this room are really angry. You have a short fuse. Guess what we need to work on ourselves? Maybe love, some joy, some peace. Start working through that. Maybe some of you are really bad at time management. You show up late everywhere you go. Maybe faithfulness and self-control are some things that you need to identify. Maybe you're just, you're always blaming other people for your problems. Maybe it's fill in the blank. We have an issue with self-management, don't we? But see, the people who transcend and start to know self-evaluation and self-management well, something happens to them. They start to kind of move from just single chair leadership to a double chair sense of relationship. Now, all of a sudden, this is the two-chair model, but what that means is that their capacity has grown. Even though everyone has the same responsibility to leadership, not everyone has the same capacity for leadership. Everyone's capacity is a little different. Some of you might be affecting and influencing and leading 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. What's the most natural model of two-chair leadership? Anyone know? What do we see in our world all the time? It's parenting. That's right. And some of you guys think that you do parenting really well. Not so much. Just kidding. I'm just seeing if you're still with me. All right? I'm just seeing if you're still with me. That's all I'm doing. But that's the most blatant example of two-chair leadership in our world, and you see capacity start to change. But it's not limited to just marriage and family development and having children. It sometimes is rooted in relational responsibilities or water cooler influences. All of us really can fit into this two-chair model of leadership. But every now and then, the leaders who get this really well, what happens? You have a person who sees what's happening and are like, hey, can I get in on that Bible study? Hey, can I get in on that ministry? And you have more people sit around the chair. And you're leading and you're teaching and you're influencing based on the things that you're doing well, and your capacity starts to grow. We're just like light bulbs. Every one of us are just like light bulbs. We have the same source, but our capacities are different. Maybe some of us are a 50-watt lamp, some of us are a 100-watt lamp. But the sense of responsibility for leadership doesn't change, it's the capacity. And some of us don't want to grow that capacity, because if we grow that capacity, that means more responsibility. The question is, where's your capacity? And there's a tipping point in capacity, for leadership capacity. It happens when you have more than just maybe 12 people in your life that you're influencing. Maybe you have 25, maybe you have 35. Eventually, you have to have a platform. And as you have a platform, there are 3 keys to platform leadership that I want to make sure I communicate well. The first one is this, that God is the one who establishes platform, not you. He's the one that brings you to a place where your platform rises, because now not everybody can see you if you have greater influence. The second thing about leadership platform is that God uses obscurity to really shape and mold and form us. I wrote down a couple of proverbs that I absolutely love. They just really spoke to me, but I wrestled with this entire week because, man, it seems like that they're saying 2 different things. I want you to hear this. It says, Proverbs chapter 17, if you want to write these down, in Proverbs chapter 27, one says, as fire is for gold and silver is for crucible, it is the Lord who tests our hearts. 27 says this, as fire is for gold and silver is for crucible, people are tested by their praise. Wait a second, that seems contradictory. What are you saying? What's that mean? I think the one that says it's the Lord who tests our hearts, what he's saying is that it shouldn't be people's opinions that ultimately shape and mold us, should it? It should be the Lord. And that's not to say that people's opinion don't affect us, because they certainly do, and I think that that's where 27 comes in, 27 verse 21. People's opinions of us shape us and mold us. They do. They have that effect. And the problem, or the tipping point for leadership, is that when you get to a platform, people start to say, man, that was fantastic. What you did there, well done, sir. And you get the praise of men. And as you get the praise of men, it starts to shape you, because that's the crevice of pride. Now, all of a sudden, you think that you're the one that did it. It's your abilities, not God's. And so, a second consideration of platform leadership is to know that God is the one who is shaping you in your obscurity. We've talked about this before. How long did it take Saul to become Paul? 14 years. How long did it take David to be little shepherd boy David and King David? About 20 years. Here's one for you. How long did it take Jesus to be the Savior of the world? You see, his ministry didn't begin until he was 30. So for 30 years, Jesus lives in obscurity. And some of you, you're living in obscurity right now, and you're wondering, when's my time going to be? When am I going to be allowed to have platform leadership? I know some of you are there. You feel like that you've been overlooked from churches or from your boss or from your job. Maybe you feel overlooked even in life, and you wonder where God is. Just remember that it's obscurity that God uses to shape us. So allow God to shape you in that obscurity so that you will lead well when you're visible, in your visibility. The same spotlight that allows people to see you better is the same spotlight that exposes your flaws. So don't be too quick to jump into a leadership role. Allow there to be some obscurity for Jesus to be shaping you, just like what you heard with Teal. God has shaped her and molded her for this ministry. A lot of things that you're going through right now, God is using or will use later. You might not know how he's using them, but just trust that he will. And the third leadership principle is also the third concept of leadership platform. Everyone will be held accountable or held by the same accountability in the standards of leadership. If you're on a platform, you better know where the edge is. Because if you don't know where the edge is and you fall off, someone's going to get hurt. So if God has given you a platform sort of leadership, and some of you are leaders, and you know that. In fact, all of you are leaders, but some of you have a higher capacity for leadership. You better know where the line is, right? Because if you don't know that line well, and you don't have integrity or character, and you step off, there's a lot of people who are banking on your leadership. So you better be careful, leader. That's why I think it says there will be a double accountability to leadership. They'll be held in a higher standard, i.e. church leadership. But the whole role of leadership is really pretty simple. Here it is. The number one role of leadership, in my opinion, is that we make people belong. We help them know that they matter and that there's a reason why they're here. I want to tell you a story about the 2016 Stanley Cup. I knew I was going to say Stanley Cup on that one. Ryder Cup finals. Now, some of you know golfing better than I know golfing, but what I understand of the Ryder Cup is that every 2 years, there's this Super Bowl event for golf, okay? And basically, it's the United States against the England states, okay? So New England, Great Britain, Europe, all that stuff. And basically, it's good versus evil. So every 2 years, we have this big tournament globally that says, hey, we're better than you are, and or no, we're better than you are. In 2008 was the last time the United States actually won the cup, the Ryder Cup. It's been a long time. We've been in a drought. And last year, through everything that was happening politically, I think this kind of got drowned and buried in some of the news coverage. But last year, there was this huge kind of swelling anticipation of what we could do in that Ryder Cup. And Davis Love was named as a captain, and he, as a captain, had the responsibility of choosing the last 4 participants on the team. What happens is the first 8, they earn the right to be in the position. The last 4 are chosen by the captain. And number 9 is a guy by the name of Bubba Watson. Bubba Watson was the 9th ranked golfer in our nation. And he was a shoo-in for the position. But what happened was, Davis Love did not choose Bubba Watson the first round. He didn't even choose him the second round. He chose number 10, number 11, and number 12. And then when it was all kind of, now who are you going to choose the very last moment? You know who he chose? Number 20. He chose number 20 because he was hot. He was really doing well. But what he did was he called Bubba Watson through each one of those choosings, and he said, Bubba, I want you on my team. I want you on my team. Even though I'm not going to choose you, right now, I want you on my team. So I'm going to find a spot for you. And that's what good leadership is. And there's a scene about how Davis and Bubba were exchanging a hug, and they won last year for the first time in 8 years. It was a big deal. But ESPN covered it, and this is what ESPN says. It said it was clear by the week's end that Bubba Watson is someone who longs to be loved, to be a part of something, and in the midst of all the pressure that was on Love's shoulders, he still managed to make Watson feel like a big part of the United States golf team. You could exchange that name, Bubba Watson, for any one of us in this room. It was clear by week's end that Steve Rowland is someone who longs to be loved, longs to be a part of something. It is clear that fill in the blank for each one of you. Every one of us long to be loved and to be a part of something. And then at the end of this statement, ESPN says this: that's what leadership looks like. And I couldn't help but compare it to Matthew 11:28. You remember, the greatest leader in all the world, as Gary said, was Jesus Christ. And Jesus said in Matthew 11:28, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I'll give you rest. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Did you hear it? Come to me, all of you. See, that's what great leadership does. Some of you might be in a single chair life right now, and you're just thinking, man, you failed at life, and you don't have any influence on anybody, and you're just struggling to kind of get up through the day. Some of you, if we look at the multi-chair aspect, and maybe it's just a husband and wife, and if you were given a report card on being a mom and a dad, you feel like that you've got a D+, maybe, and that's being generous. That's if you're grading on the curve. And you don't think that you belong on this thing. Maybe for some of you, you're business executives, or you've got a large platform, and you're just trying to manage, and man, the details in the day, every day, you're just swarmed. Jesus says to you, come to me, all of you who are weary, and I'll give you rest. That's what leadership looks like. Leadership is involving everybody. You have relationship with someone, and you have influence on someone who has influence on you. Father, thank you for this day. And I pray that if this message strikes a chord with someone and they need to talk, or they want to talk, that they would have the courage just to come down and let us love on them. Lord, I pray that you would expand their capacity to lead and lead well. In Christ's name.
My one and only, oh, you. My one and only, oh, I'm a one-trick pony. If I hear just one more time that I should try and be more open-minded, I think I just might scream. This world says this is all there is, yet I believe the one who says there's life after this. Now tell me, how much more open can my mind be? You are my one and only.